the organized and unorganized sectors to file complaints directly and to track their progress through a channel that we can say runs independently of. And though it complements rather than replaces the internal ICC or local committee mechanism, the portal is designed to route a complaint concerning a private organization to that organization's own internal committee for inquiry, while allowing the ministry visibility into whether the matter has actually been taken up and progressed within statutory timelines, effectively adding a layer of external tracking on the top of the internal process. Okay, so organization should be prepared for the possibility that that we can say that a complaint may first surface through SheBox rather than internally and should have a defined protocol coordinating with that external channel when it does. So, including a designated point of contact responsible for monitoring the portal and a clear internal escalation path so that a complaint arriving through this route receives exactly the same urgency, confidentiality, and procedural rigor as one filed directly with the committee. Okay, so this is we can say this should be there. An organization that responds more slowly to a SheBox routed complaint than to an internally filed one is creating an entirely avoidable and easily documented compliance gap. Okay, so now we will talk about the gray areas here, decoding behavior and power. सबसे पहले we will talk about at first quid pro quo or quid pro quo versus hostile work environment. We have now covered the full statutory architecture here. I want to turn to something harder, not the machinery of the law, but the judgment calls that determine when that machinery should be engaged at all. Okay, so the Act recognizes two distinct ways harassment manifests, and the distinction between them is critical, both for how you train your workforce, for how your internal committee should analyze a complaint. So, quid pro quo, that literally means this for that, is is an explicit abuse of institutional authority. It occurs when an employment benefit, such as promotion, a favorable appraisal, or even continued employment itself, is made conditional on a sexual favor. It involves directly leverage. Do this for me, and I will do that for you. Refuse, and your career here is over. If you refuse, then your career is over. This is often the easier category to identify, precisely because it typically involves a, we can say, discernible transaction, even if that transaction is implied rather than explicit. So, hostile work environment is far more common and considerably more subtle. It does not require any direct threat to employment. Instead it describes an environment saturated with unwelcome conduct, persistent sexually colored remarks, constant commentary on physical appearance, the display of offensive material, or or we can say, or a pattern of jokes that always seem to target the same individual, that together create an intimidating, offensive, or oppressive atmosphere. No single incident within it here, whatever we have talked about, No single incident within this may look dramatic in isolation. It is the accumulation and the atmosphere it produces that constitute the violation. So, for legal teams advising internal committees, this distinction should shape how evidence is gathered and weighed. Quid pro quo cases often turn on establishing a conditional link between conduct and a specific employment decision, while hostile environment cases typically require establishing a pattern over time, drawing on multiple incidences, witness accounts, and a documented atmosphere rather than a single transactional exchange. So, let me make both categories more concrete with the kind of fact patterns that actually arrive in front of internal committees. Quid pro quo in its real world form really sounds like a villain's line from a film, है ना? It sounds like a manager telling a direct report during an otherwise ordinary one-to-one. You know, if you want that project lead role, you need to be someone I actually enjoy spending time with outside work too. And then following up with a dinner invitation framed as informal mentorship. There is no explicit threat in that sentence. There does not need to be one for underlying dynamic to be quid pro quo once the surrounding facts, timing relative to a review cycle, the manager's decision making authority, the pattern of similar comments to others are examined, these are examined together. Hostile work environment correspondingly often looks like a slow accumulation that no single witness uh, could adequately describe in isolation. Okay, a colleague who routinely comments on what a woman is wearing before any work related conversation begins. A WhatsApp group where messages meant to be just for the boys occasionally get sent to the group by a mistake, a habit across an entire team of assigning the administrative and note taking task in every meeting to the most junior women present, regardless of her actual role. None of these alone would likely sustain a standalone complaint. Together, documented over weeks or months, they build precisely we can say, they build the atmosphere the statute is describing when it refers to conduct that uh, creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. Now, let us address the single most important phrase in the entire POSH framework, a phrase that once genuinely internalized changes how an organization evaluates most difficult case. Yes, sure. So, difficult case, unwelcome behavior. When a complaint is evaluated, the legal and analytical focus falls on the impact of the conduct on the person who experienced it, not on the intent of the person who engaged in it. This is the exact point at which standard legal compliance training tips over into genuine cultural literacy. I want to spend real time here because it is where I see the most resistance in live training rooms. Let's name the resistance directly because pretending it doesn't exist doesn't help anyone in this room advise their organizations well. The person whose conduct is in this question will very often and very sincerely believe one of the following: I was just paying a compliment. Okay, it was just a harmless joke. Everyone else laughed, and I genuinely didn't mean anything by it. Here is the legal and ethical reality. None of that matters if the behavior was unwelcome and created discomfort for the recipient. If a colleague asks you to stop using a familiar nickname for them, and you continue anyway your original intent, however innocent. Uh,
Mohit, please mute.
yes.
Nothing, ma'am. You can
All
continue.
right, all right, all right. So let me walk through how this plays out in a live inquiry, because the abstraction becomes far clearer with the dialogue attached to it. Imagine a respondent telling the committee, I called her sweetheart, the way I call everyone sweetheart. So it's just how I talk. It means nothing. That may well be true as a description of the respondent's general habit and even their sincere self perception. It is almost entirely irrelevant to the committee's finding. The relevant question is different. Did the complainant at the same point indicate through words, through visible discomfort, through a direct request that this term was unwelcome to her specifically? If she did, and the conduct continued regardless of general habit or claimed innocence, the impact analysis is largely settled regardless of how sincerely the respondent believed no harm was intended. Okay, so the reality of the modern harassment is now. What is that? Harassment in practice is rarely loud, or we can say cartoonish. It rarely announces itself with an unmistakable act that everyone in this room immediately recognizes as a violation. Far more often, it lies in subtle, cumulative micro behaviors that quietly erode a person's sense of psychological safety long before any single incident would independently justify a formal complaint. So consider what I call micro invalidations, persistently uh, interrupting the same colleague in meetings, attributing a woman's professional successes to a diversity initiative rather than to her competence. The passive aggressive dismissible that follows an uncomfortable comment. Don't take it personally, it's just a joke. None of these in isolation is likely to constitute an actionable violation under this act. Their cumulative effect over months is precisely the atmosphere that a hostile environment analysis is designed to capture. So, here, I Um, I also want to be candid with the audience about a dimension the statute itself does not fully address. The Indian Posh Act is explicitly and deliberately gender specific. The statutory redressal mechanism through the internal committee is built specifically to protect the aggrieved women, and that legislative choice reflects the particular history and data underlying the law. Okay, at the same time, a genuine commitment to workplace dignity cannot stop the boundary of the statutory coverage. Men, non binary individuals, and LGBTQs plus employees experience workplace bullying, harassment, and psychological unsafety. Sorry. As well, even where the specific IC mechanism under this Act does not extend to their complaints in the same statutory form, if our ambition, as this session's title suggests, is genuinely to move beyond the law, then our internal commitment to dignity, our organizational policies, our escalation channels, our culture must extend to every individual in the organization, regardless, we can say, regardless of identity, even where the Posh Act's specific machinery does not. Okay, I would add one more dimension to the reality of modern harassment harassment because it is one I see legal and HR teams under prepare for. The generational and platform specific texture of this digital misconduct. A comment that reads as an unmistakable red flag to a senior HR professional, an explicit message sent directly is, in my experience, actually we can say the less common pattern among newer entrants to the workforce today. Uh, what I see far more often, mm, they are ambiguous digital signals deployed precisely because of their deniability. Reaction emojis on a personal photo, repeated so persistently it becomes a pattern. A just checking you got home safe, message sent late at night, framed as concern, sent repeatedly to the same person and no one else, being added to a personal non-work social account and then messaged there instead of an official channels specifically to route around a paper trail. Okay, so what we can do the safeguard against malice. I want to close here by addressing an anxiety that surfaces in most every training session that I conduct. The law explicitly accounts for this risk under Section 14. If after a thorough inquiry, the internal committee concludes that the allegation was made with malicious intent or that the complainant knowingly produced forged or false documents in support of the complaint, the committee may recommend disciplinary action against the complainant, potentially matching the severity of the penalties applicable for the underlying harassment itself. But I need to draw a clear legal distinction here also because it is routinely blurred in an ordinary workplace conversation, and blurring it has a we can say real chilling effect on genuine complaints, and inability to substantiate a complaint with concrete evidence is not the same as malicious complaint. Okay, a case where there are no corroborating witnesses, no preserved messages, no documentary trail, that case is simply unsubstantiated. A malicious case, we can say, is a fundamentally different finding, one where is affirmatively established that the individual fabricated the account with the specific intent of harming someone's reputation. All right. So here are the scenarios, everything we have discussed so far, the statutory architecture, the behavioral distincts, the standard of impact over intent only becomes useful once you can apply it to a real sets of facts. Okay, and here I want to walk through some scenarios with you now. I'll describe each briefly, and I want you, as a legal students, to actively run each one through the frameworks we have just built. Okay, so there is a scenario. A senior manager begins sending subordinate personal messages outside office hours. Nothing overtly explicit in any single message, but increasingly personal and persistent over several weeks, largely on the organization's official communication channels. Run this through what we have discussed. Is there a power differential? Yes or no? Yes. Manager to subordinate? Yes. Is there a pattern rather than an isolated incident? Obviously, yes. Several weeks of escalating contact is there. Are these official or work adjacent channels bringing Section 2O and the Sanjeev Mishra reasoning on digital workplace squarely into play? Obviously, yes. So, this is precisely the kind of case that is the greatest risk of being dismissed early as nothing serious happened because no single message viewed alone looks alarming. That is exactly why the hostile environment framework exists to evaluate pattern and power together rather than requiring one dramatic incident before the conduct is taken seriously. The employer takeaway is direct. Digital conduct on official or work adjacent platform is workplace conduct in full and regardless of the hour it recurs. So, if this reached an internal committee, I would expect the inquiry to focus on three evidentiary threads that may be uh, the message history itself, preserved and produced in full rather and we can say full that must be produced in full rather than in selective excerpts from either side, any point at which the subordinate indicated, however indirectly, that the contact was unwelcome, a delayed reply, a one word response, an explicit request to stop, and any pattern of similar behavior by the same manager toward other subordinates, which, if present, would move this decisively from an ambiguous personal boundary that question toward a documented pattern consistent with abuse of hierarchical authority. Okay, this will soon, this will be ended soon. Okay, so now let me introduce the next scenario. Okay, that is, we can say, mm, that is the vendor at the workplace. Okay, let me add a variation on the same theme because it surfaces a jurisdictional question. Legal terms are asked about often. A women employee raises a complaint against a vendor's representative who regularly visits the office to service equipment or deliver goods, alleging repeated inappropriate comments during these visits. Here, the complaint is unambiguously within the Act's protection. She is an employee, and the conduct occurred at her workplace. The respondent, however, is not the organization's own employee. Section 2O of the Act broader scheme makes clear that the employer's obligation to provide redressal does not evaporate simply because the alleged respondent is third party rather than a colleague. Okay, so IC retains jurisdiction to inquire into the complaint as it concerns the the complainant's experience at the workplace, and the employer retains an obligation to take appropriate action up to and including barring that individual from the premises, even though it cannot impose employment related disciplinary on uh, someone who is not in its own employ. So, this is the scenario I would specifically encourage every organization in this room to address explicitly in its written policy because I still see a surprising number of policies that are silent on third party respondents entirely. Okay, so now then another scenario here we now I think this session is going too much, so I'll not adding another scenario. Okay, but yes, I am here moving forward, um moving from bystander to upstander. Okay, as we move as we move from the legal chapters of this session into day to day culture, I want to focus on the single most transformative behavioral shift an organization can make, moving away from the culture of the passive bystander. When something inappropriate happens in a meeting or in a shared digital space, staying silent is not a neutral act. Okay, it is the choice. and it sends two messages simultaneously. To the person behaving inappropriately, silence signals that the conduct is acceptable. To the person targeted, silence signals that they are isolated with no one in the room willing to notice. Okay, becoming upstanders does not require loud confrontation in the middle of the shared workplace. For the most of the people, that is unrealistic, and we can say even counterproductive expectation. It means using clean, low risk interventions that are genuinely available to anyone. Okay, so here setting personal boundaries with clarity is most important. True professional respect requires absolute clarity in both directions. If a colleague's words or communication style cross your own professional boundary, communicate that boundary clearly. Okay, plainly and without apology. A sentence as simple: I would prefer to keep our conversations focused on our project's deliverables. Or please don't text me on my personal phone after hours unless it's a genuinely emergency. These kind of words removes ambiguity and gives the person no room to claim they didn't understand. Okay, and another, that is building a training architecture that actually works. Before I turn to leadership specifically, I want to say a word about training itself, because we would conduct annual post training most of the time. That has become such a routine sentence that it almost stopped meaning anything. A single identical once a year module delivered to every employee, regardless of role, is complaint. Okay, it is rarely effective. All right. Now, uh, leadership accountability and the manager's role here. Everything that we have discussed today ultimately depends on leadership behavior, because tone travels downward far faster than policy travels upward. Okay, if a leader visibly minimizes or dismisses a complaint, even once, even informally, even in what feels like a private aside, that single movement can undo years of careful policy communication. Leadership training on this subject needs to be genuinely distinct from general employee training, addressing the specific accountability that comes with seniority, visibility, and outsized every single leadership action sense. Okay, so now I think we have discussed so much about this. So we have covered too much from a public interest litigation. Now I want to throw your light on some important topic also. I will take your 10 minutes only now. From a public interest litigation born to one woman suffering in Rajasthan through 16 years of judicial guidelines operating as binding law before Parliament codified them, through the complete statutory machinery of complainant, inquiry, confidentiality, and penalty into a genuinely difficult territory of intent, impact, and gray area behavior, and finally into scenarios I suspect more than a few of you recognized from your own organizations. I want to leave you with this: a safe, dignified workplace does not happen by accident, and it does not happen because a lawyer somewhere drafted a flawless policy document. It happens because every individual in an organization is starting but not ending. We can say with leadership decides that professional excellence cannot exist without basic human dignity. Okay, so here, this is, I think, this is the hand from my side. So I want to say only this: let us build workplaces where the question we ask ourselves is not only Is this legal? But is this respectful? Okay, take the framework of this law, its history, its precision, its safeguard for every party involved, and use it not as ceiling to avoid crossings, but as a floor to build upward from. Okay, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. This session was really very good. Ma'am, there is a question for you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
ma'am. Yeah. Ma'am, I was telling that I was sitting and listening to your words. It was really careful and effective and also insightful. But one question is arising here. Only a simple one question I'm going to ask. And that question is like, ma'am, looking into the gravity and seriousness, at many places, it has been found that while
Hmm.
focusing on pause, the misuse of law has also been found, thereby blackmailing in the organizations. It has also been found that in the framework can occasionally be exploited to settle personal score target managers during appraisals or defame
Hmm.
colleagues through false or malicious complaints. Then what are the parameters should one follow to safeguard the male employee if he is not indulged in any type of pause or sexual harassment act in the workplace? Ma'am, are you there?
Guys, I want to clarify a few things. Alright. The PDF of the previous session, consisting of e-certificates, have been already shared in the official webinar group. So if you are not there or if you have joined right now, please text any of the admin to reshare it with you again. All right. And the second thing, the feedback form is already shared in the chat box. I can see that many people are filling it and leaving, so please be respectful. Ma'am has not yet completed the session. So please stay until then. Thank you.
Yeah, please, I am here. I am here. Now.
Ma'am, will I have to repeat the question once again?
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure, sure.
Okay, definitely, ma'am. I do understand that there is a network problem. There is a
Yeah.
network issue. Sorry for the inconvenience for that. But once again, I am repeating the question, ma'am. It's a very, I think it's a very important question, right, ma'am? So we
Mm-hmm.
should focus on this question also that while going through many of the places, and I don't have so much experience regarding this, but what the thing I have found is that looking into the gravity and seriousness, at many places it has been found that while focusing on pause, the misuse of law has also been found, thereby blackmailing in the organization. It has also been found that the framework can occasionally be
Mm-hmm.
exploited to settle personal scores, target managers during appraisals, or defame colleagues through false or malicious complaints. Then, what are the
Mm-hmm.
parameters should one follow to safeguard the male employee if he is not indulged in any type of pause or sexual harassment act in the workplace?
Okay, okay. So, if the person, if the male employee is not involved into that kind of behavior, so by a strict statutory definition, the POSH Act is, we can say, the gender specific only. Okay, so here first he has to go for the HR and service misconduct framework there. If the uh, if the person is sorry, एक second, let me check some points. Yeah, if he want to file a complaint, then he can go through the HR policies. Okay, because there, this posh is completely gender specific. Okay, and no one can do anything for that. This is, we can say, the flow. And I already mentioned there that that should that has to widen its scope for that purpose. Okay, but in this scenario, obviously he has to mention all these things with the HRs, and the employer has to take immediate effect for all these things there.
Okay,
Yes.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome.